Sarah and Ben had finally done it. After years of saving, they'd bought their first home in the quiet, unassuming town of Havenwood. It was an older house, a charming Victorian with gabled roofs and a sprawling porch, a little rough around the edges, but full of character. They were eager to put their own stamp on it, to fill its empty rooms with laughter and memories. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking, painting, and minor repairs. They discovered quirky original features, a dumbwaiter in the dining room, a stained glass window hidden behind a boarded-up wall. It felt like the house was slowly revealing its secrets, each one adding to its charm. Then came the discovery in the basement. The basement was a typical old house affair, damp, dimly lit, even during the day, with low ceilings and the scent of earth and forgotten things. Ben was down there, trying to figure out why the ancient washing machine wouldn't drain properly, when he noticed something odd about the far wall. Most of the basement walls were rough-hewn stone, but one section, tucked away behind the furnace, looked different. It was a patch of surprisingly smooth plastered wall, and it didn't quite align with the rest. Curiosity piqued. Ben squeezed behind the bulky furnace for a closer look. He ran his hand over the surface, feeling a subtle indentation. It felt hollow. "Sarah, can you come down here for a second?" he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Sarah, who was upstairs battling a stubborn window latch, sighed, but headed down. "What is it?" she asked, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Ben pointed to the wall. "This section, I think there's something behind it." Together, they examined the anomaly. They tapped on it, and the sound was distinctly different from the solid stone around it. It was muffled, echoing. Excitement and a touch of unease flickered between them. Driven by a sudden surge of adrenaline, Ben went to grab a crowbar from his toolbox. With Sarah holding the flashlight, he carefully wedged the end of the crowbar into the seam where the plaster met the stone. With a grunt, he pried. A small crack appeared, and a puff of stale, musty air escaped, carrying with it a scent that made Sarah wrinkle her nose, something akin to old paper and decay. They worked together, widening the crack, the plaster groaning and crumbling. Finally, with a loud snap, a section of the wall gave way, revealing a dark, rectangular opening. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, her flashlight beam dancing across the newly revealed space. It was a room, small and windowless. The air inside was thick and heavy, the musty smell overpowering. Ben shone the flashlight inside. The beam illuminated bare stone walls and a dirt floor. In the center of the room sat a single wooden chair, its back to them. A prickle of unease ran down Sarah's spine. "This feels wrong," she whispered. Ben, however, was too intrigued to be deterred. "Come on," he said, stepping through the opening. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then followed, her flashlight beam nervously scanning the room.
As they moved further inside, they noticed something else. Etched into the stone walls were symbols, strange, swirling patterns that didn't look like any language they recognized. They were unsettling, almost hypnotic in their design. Then their eyes fell on the chair. Slowly, Ben circled around it, his flashlight beam illuminating its dusty surface, and that's when they saw it. Seated in the chair was a figure. It was slumped forward, its head lolling to the side, obscured by shadow. It was dressed in what appeared to be old, tattered clothes. A wave of nausea washed over Sarah. "Is it—" she began, her voice trembling. Ben held up a hand, taking a hesitant step closer. As he did, a faint sound reached their ears, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like the ticking of an old clock. The sound seemed to be coming from the figure. Ben reached out a hand, his fingers hovering just inches from the figure's shoulder. He needed to see its face, to confirm his growing dread. He gently nudged the slumped form. The figure's head lolled further to the side, and they finally saw its face. Sarah gasped, stumbling backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Ben recoiled as if struck. The face was not human. It was elongated, the skin stretched taut over sharp, jutting bone. The eyes were wide and vacant, black pits that seemed to absorb the light. The mouth was stretched into a grotesque, fixed smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. And its ears were long and pointed, twitching slightly with each faint click. But it wasn't just the face. Protruding from the figure's chest were several thin ivory needles, connected by delicate threads to a small clockwork mechanism that was attached to the back of the chair. The rhythmic clicking was coming from this device. As they stared in horror, one of the figure's long skeletal fingers twitched. Then another. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the figure began to raise its head. The black pits that were its eyes seemed to fixate on them, not with recognition, but with a chilling, predatory awareness. A low, guttural sound emanated from its throat, a sound that was more vibration than voice, and the clicking from the mechanism on the chair intensified. Panic seized Sarah. "We have to get out of here," she screamed, turning and scrambling back toward the opening. Ben, his mind reeling in disbelief and terror, followed close behind. As they squeezed back through the hole in the wall, they could hear the scraping sound of the chair being pushed back, followed by the sickeningly slow, deliberate steps of the figure moving towards them. They didn't stop running until they were out of the basement and had burst through the back door into the cool night air. They kept running across their lawn, across the quiet street, not daring to look back. They didn't stop until they reached the gas station a mile away, their lungs burning, their bodies trembling with adrenaline and fear. They stood under the bright fluorescent lights, panting, trying to make sense of what they had seen.
They knew one thing for certain: they could not stay in that house, not for another night. They called the police, their voices shaky as they tried to explain the impossible. The officers who arrived were skeptical, but they agreed to investigate. Sarah and Ben waited outside, huddled together, watching as the officers cautiously entered their new home. Hours later, the police emerged, their faces grim. They confirmed the hidden room and the chair, but the figure, it was gone. There was no sign of it, just the strange symbols on the walls and the unsettling scent of decay. The police launched an investigation, but they found nothing conclusive. The history of the house was murky, with rumors of strange occurrences and previous owners who had abruptly left. Sarah and Ben never went back. They couldn't. The image of that gaunt, clicking figure, the vacant black eyes, was burned into their minds. They sold the house at a significant loss, the memory of their dream home forever tainted by the nightmare they had found hidden in its depths. They often wondered what the clicking mechanism was for, what unholy purpose it served. They wondered where the figure had gone, and if it was still out there, waiting for another unsuspecting soul to stumble upon its hidden chamber. And late at night, when the world was still and quiet, they would sometimes hear a faint, rhythmic clicking in the darkness, a sound that would send shivers down their spines and remind them of the terror they had barely escaped in the house in Havenwood, the house that had promised them a new beginning, but had instead shown them a glimpse of something ancient, something malevolent, something that should have remained hidden forever. Renovating a house on your own teaches you a lot about patience. For Chloe, it also taught her about fear. She'd bought a small, neglected bungalow on the edge of town, determined to breathe life back into its old bones.
The living room was her first major project, a room dominated by hideous, sun-faded floral wallpaper from the 1970s. Armed with a steamer and a scraper, she began the laborious process of peeling it away. It came off in stubborn, satisfying strips, revealing the pale, bare plaster underneath. Or so she thought. As she cleared a large section behind where a bookshelf once stood, she realized it wasn't bare. There was another layer of wallpaper underneath. This layer was older, its pattern a faded, repeating geometric design. It was unusual, but not unsettling. With a sigh, Chloe started on the second layer. This one was fused to the wall, much harder to remove. As she worked late into the evening, she began to notice a strange detail in the pattern. Within the geometric shapes, almost hidden, were faint, stylized illustrations of faces, weeping faces. Each one was slightly different, a study in silent anguish. A chill unrelated to the evening air crept down her spine. Determined to finish, she scraped harder. A large piece tore away, but it didn't reveal plaster. It revealed a third layer, painted directly onto the wall itself. It was a mural. Chloe stepped back, her scraper clattering to the floor. It was an exquisitely detailed, life-size portrait of a woman with long, dark hair, dressed in Victorian attire. Her face was beautiful, but her expression was one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. Her painted eyes, a startlingly vivid shade of blue, were filled with unshed tears. The artistry was breathtaking. It was also deeply, deeply unsettling. That night, Chloe slept fitfully. The image of the crying woman burned into her mind. She was woken around 3 a.m. by a sound, a soft, muffled sobbing, so faint she thought she was dreaming it. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the living room. She lay perfectly still, listening, until the sound faded and only the creaking of the old house remained. The next day, she tried to ignore it. It was just a painting, a creepy painting, but a painting nonetheless. She decided to prime the wall and paint over it. But when she applied the first stroke of white primer, something strange happened. The paint seemed to sizzle and slide off the portrait, as if repelled by an unseen force. No matter how many times she tried, the paint would not adhere to the woman's face. The sorrowful blue eyes stared back at her, untouched. Frustration gave way to a growing dread. As the days passed, the phenomena escalated. The sobbing at night became clearer, more distinct. She started finding small, damp patches on the wall around the portrait, cold to the touch. It was as if the wall itself was weeping. One evening, while watching TV, she glanced into the living room and her heart stopped. In the dim light, she could have sworn she saw a single, glistening tear track down the painted cheek of the woman in the mural. That was the breaking point. This thing, whatever it was, had to go. The next weekend, she armed herself with a hammer and a chisel. If she couldn't paint over it, she would chip it off the wall, plaster and all. She put on safety goggles, took a deep breath, and struck the first blow near the edge of the mural. The plaster chipped away, but the sound was wrong. It wasn't the sharp, brittle crack of old plaster. It was a dull, soft thud. She chiseled away another piece. The material underneath wasn't lath and plaster. It was pale, soft, and fibrous. It looked disturbingly organic. A nauseating, sweet smell, like wilted flowers, began to fill the room. With trembling hands, She chiseled away a larger piece from the center of the mural, right over the woman's crying mouth. The plaster crumbled, and what lay beneath made Chloe scream, a raw, ragged sound of pure terror. It was not a wall. Pressed into the space between the studs was a human form, pale and emaciated, wrapped in burial shrouds. But the horror was its face. The plaster had been applied directly over it, and as it fell away, it revealed a real, desiccated face beneath. Its eyes were closed, but its mouth was open in a silent scream, and it was wet. A thick, clear liquid was seeping from its closed eyelids. As Chloe stared, frozen in horror, the thing in the wall shifted. A low, gurgling sob echoed in the small room, and the mummified eyelids began to flutter. Chloe didn't wait to see them open. She dropped her tools, scrambled out of the house, and never looked back. The weeping in the walls was no longer just a sound. It was a prisoner, and she had just broken the seal on its tomb. The attic's audience. Liam figured the cheap rent was worth the quirks of the old house. He was a grad student, and the top-floor apartment he'd found was spacious, if a little drafty. His landlord, a gruff old man, had only one strange rule: don't mess with the attic. There's nothing up there but dust and memories, best to leave them be. The attic was accessible only by a pull-down hatch in the ceiling of Liam's closet. For months, he honored the landlord's request, but the curiosity gnawed at him. What could be so important to warn him about? One boring Tuesday afternoon, he gave in. He pulled the creaky wooden stairs down and ascended into the darkness, his phone's flashlight cutting a nervous beam through the thick, dancing dust. The attic was huge, stretching the entire length of the house, and as the landlord had promised, it was mostly empty. Bare wooden beams, insulation that looked like gray snow, and a single, small, circular window at the far end, caked with grime. But it wasn't entirely empty. Hanging from the central rafters by thin black strings was a collection of about a dozen antique marionettes. They were beautiful, hand-carved wooden puppets, dressed in faded, once elegant clothing. There was a king, a queen, a jester, a knight, all of them hanging limp and lifeless. They were arranged in a rough circle, and they were all facing inward, towards a single, empty wooden stool placed directly in the center of the floor. Liam found it more strange than scary. It was like a forgotten theater, its actors waiting for a show that would never come. He took a few pictures, then retreated back to his apartment, pulling the hatch closed. That night he heard the first sound, a faint, rhythmic scraping from the ceiling directly above his bed. Rats, he thought, rolling over. Old house, old problems. The next night, the sound was different. It wasn't scraping. It was a soft, intermittent talk. Talk, talk. Talk. Like small wooden balls knocking together. It was strange, but Liam was exhausted from studying and eventually drifted off to sleep. A week passed. The sounds continued, sometimes soft, sometimes more frantic. Liam was starting to get annoyed. He decided to go up and set some traps. He pulled the attic stairs down again and climbed up, his flashlight beam sweeping the space. He froze at the top of the stairs. Everything was as it was before, but different. The marionettes were no longer hanging perfectly still. The king's wooden head was now tilted to the side. The jester's arm was bent at an impossible angle. The queen seemed to be looking directly at him. It was as if they had been posed, like dolls in a macabre tableau. And on the dusty floor around the central stool, there were marks. Tiny, scuffle tracks and drag marks, as if the puppets had been moving, their little wooden feet kicking up the dust. There were no signs of rats. A cold knot formed in Liam's stomach. This wasn't normal. He backed down the stairs, closed the hatch, and for the first time slid the small bolt lock into place. The true terror began the next day. He came home from a late class to find his apartment door slightly ajar. He always locked it. His heart pounded as he pushed it open. Nothing seemed to be stolen. He checked his laptop, his wallet, all there. Then he walked into his bedroom. Sitting on his desk chair, posed with one leg crossed over the other, was the jester marionette. Liam stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Its painted, smiling face seemed to mock him. He hadn't brought it down. The attic was bolted. He snatched the puppet, its wooden limbs clacking together, ran to the closet, unbolted the hatch, and threw the jester back into the darkness. He slammed the hatch shut and bolted it again, his hands shaking. It didn't stop. The next morning, the knight was on his kitchen counter, its tiny wooden sword resting against the toaster. The day after, the queen was sitting on his sofa, her head tilted as if watching the muted TV. Liam was living in a state of constant, escalating dread. He was barely sleeping. He barricaded the closet door with his dresser. It made no difference. He woke up one night to the feeling of being watched. He slowly opened his eyes. Hanging from the ceiling of his bedroom, suspended by their thin black strings that seemed to stretch down from an unseen point in the darkness above, were all of the marionettes. They formed a perfect circle around his bed. Their little wooden heads were all angled down, their painted eyes fixed on him. They were perfectly still, a silent, menacing audience. And at the foot of his bed, where there was nothing before, now sat the small, empty wooden stool from the attic. He didn't scream. The sound was trapped in his throat, a block of pure, cold ice. He finally understood. The landlord was wrong. There was something in the attic, an audience, and they hadn't been waiting for a show. They had been waiting for him. They had finally found someone new to watch.